Hi, this is Ben CB for Raise Your Edge, and today we'll move on with the optimal post-flop strategy. Normally this is part 3, cause we organized the post-flop course in 2 parts, cause it was very complex and long. When you haven't watched these videos, I beg you to show these videos first. In this video we will look into situations when we are out of position and the pre-flop raiser. I'll try to make you fit in the out of position play as a cold caller, and I will talk about donking opportunities, so when it is useful to donk bet and against which opponents. And as the last point, we look at situations as a cold caller in position. This depends on a lot of factors, and then we look how we should continue with the hands post flop. I think the biggest mistake of many players is that they tend to check call too much, and that's the reason why they get into a lot of tough spots on the turn or on the river. Another problem is that they are very often in the guessing game. They have a relatively strong hand, but they are totally lost when they have just a bluff catcher, and these spots are avoidable when you bet straight for value and don't check call too much or miss value bets. Many players only play the actual street. They don't think about which hands to improve my range, so a game plan is missing, or which cards are suitable to bluff. You can think on the flop if it makes sense to see it. When you have backdoors or many backdoors, it makes sense to make a plan on which turn cards should I barrel and on which cards should I give up. I can represent an ace or these overcards, and you should make this plan on the flop that you don't have to evaluate on the turn again and tank for a long time, and the same applies to the river. This just costs you a lot of time, and today it's important to make a fast and correct decision to save time. Many players don't pay attention to their bet sizing. They bet most of the time with the same sizing, and very often when they do this, the stack to pot ratio is very unfavorable. So on the river, they have a small overbet left, or when we have a 2 street hand, so we want to be all in on the turn. As an example, when we have a hand with many backdoors, like king queen on 10 deuce 3, and we have many backdoors, so backdoor straight and backdoor flush draw, then the jack comes on the turn, and very often we have 380 chips, and in the pot are 290 chips. We give ourselves a bad price on the turn when this happens, and even with a half pot size bet, we are nearly committed. We should think on the flop, what do I have to bet when I want to shove the turn for 2/3 or 3/4 pot size? I also talked about this topic in my video course about optimal bet sizing. There are also some situations in which we should check the flop. This is especially the case when we play against tight ranges that crush certain board textures very hard. So a Jack 10 deuce board is a board like this. When we are in middle position and the regular on the button flat calls, then we have very rarely 3 streets value. And this is the case against most regulars, or every regular, and we should check the flop with hands that can continue on most turn cards. And we should also check this board cause it's the board which we have to give up often, cause it hits his flatting range on the button very well. When there's a flush draw on the flop, I would prefer c-betting my hand. When we c-bet a board like this, I don't think that we get bluff raised very often, so we can bet fold our hand. It's another story when we play against an aggressive regular. He can raise with hands like 8-9 suited, 9-7 suited, and get it in with his flush draws. His only value hands are Jack 10, cause with pocket 10s and pocket jacks he would broke pre-flop. So against an aggressive opponent we can broke this hand on the flop, but you can impress when you don't have 3 streets value and the turn is very easy to play on nearly all turn cards, then you can check those hands on the flop. Against weak fun players we should just barrel, cause they call with all jacks, 3 streets, and sometimes the hero call it 10. Then we shouldn't balance our ranges. But when we are in late position, so we open the button and the regular flats in the big blind, then we should always c-bet. The same applies in blind with blind spots. We have the nuts in those positions and we can barrel 3 streets for value. When should we differ from our standard game with very strong hands and check call or check raise? That's the case when we play against very aggressive opponents. You can use the BIP stat in this case. In Holy Manager 2 it is the stat bet in position versus missed c-bet. I remember the stat as the bet in position stat, that's why I shortened the stat to BIP. When this stat is very high, we can differ from our standard game against other racks and check raise many hands. Many racks are very unbalanced in these spots and we can exploit this. Most racks have a stat between 40 and 50%. When the stat is over 50%, the betting frequencies are a little bit higher than normal. Over 50%, we can put some hands of our betting range in our check raise range or in our check call range. When the stat is over 60%, we should adapt very hard. And the second point is when pot control is more important than protection. As an example, we have King Queen in hearts on this flop. We don't have 3 streets against the regular, and we have many backdoor draws that don't scare us on the turn. But against a fish we should just barrel through. Now I prepared some hands when we are the pre-flop raiser out of position, and I added some stats. That's not a final HUD, I just added stats that are relevant for those spots, that you don't see too many stats. I structured this HUD into 2 panels. At the top we have the pre-flop stats and at the bottom we have the post-flop stats. In the first row we have the flop c-bet stat, the fold to check raise stat, the turn c-bet stat, and the river c-bet stat. The second row is the fold to flop c-bet stat and the fold c-bet turn stat. Then we have the fold river c-bet stat, and depending on the sample size you can make some adaptations. There are several players with high fold river c-bet stats and you can 3-barrel a lot against them. The next stat is the BIP stat, so the bet versus missed c-bet stat. So how often is my opponent betting when I don't c-bet and check? The first stat is the overall stat and the second stat is the in position stat. Often I add another stat that I have the detailed stats from a specific position. Now we are out of position, so the in position stat is more relevant. The in position stat is often higher than the out of position stat. That's the stat when we are in position, but we check back, and how often is he stabbing the turn after that. Okay, let's start with the first hand. The button is a weaker player, as you can see on his stats. He flat calls, and on his first 43 hands he bet 2 times in position when it was checked to him. When I don't have the ace and spade I would always bet, but in this case I decided to check cause he looks very aggressive and they like to attack those boards. When he checks back I get my whole stack in with 2 big bets. I check, but unfortunately he checks back, so we should start betting ourselves. He calls and the river is a blank. I expect him to bet his flush draws on the flop. He can have a hand like pocket fours or ace deuce, but very often we are ahead and we ship all in, cause it is possible that he checked a weak ace, and sometimes you get the sickest calls. He calls with ace 5, that is totally standard. But this confirms my thinking, so they bluff very often on these board textures and check back their value hands. So we get more money off his bluffs and we get all the money in with an overbet when he checks the flop. We block the flush draws, and that's the reason why we can play our hand this way. When I had the hand again, I would play it the same way. Unfortunately, we are unlucky and he has so few 2x in his range. So you should keep betting and go for max value. Let's move on to the next hand. We have pocket kings in the small blind and raise. The big blind is a weaker player and I choose to check this flop. I think he will bluff very often and there are very few bad turn cards. Sometimes we'll lose a street value against 2x or 3x, but it compensates cause he can bet with a hand like 10-9 and he can hit his pair. There are nearly no draws and that's why we can check a board like this. I think this board is similar to the ace 5 tray board. They bet these boards very often and we check call. Check raise makes no sense cause we want to keep his air hands. We want to give him the opportunity to hit something with 8-9. The turn is unlovely, but we shouldn't fold this turn. It is a good bluff card for him and he can have many diamond draws now. And we call against his overbet. You shouldn't hero fold in this spot. The thing is, you don't have so many ace high hands, cause he checks these hands usually on the flop. Or he shoves with these hands pre-flop. So it is very rare that he has an ace. And he shipped his gut shot on the turn and we get a little bit unlucky. Let's move on to the next hand. We have ace jack in the small blind and of course we raise a little bit bigger in the small blind cause we are out of position. The big blind flat calls and we have a really interesting board. On his 780 hands, his bet in position stat is 75. That's extremely high and that's why I decided to check this flop. When he had a normal stat of 40 or 50, I would just c-bet. And I would c-bet the turn again for value when the turn is not the queen. Depending on the card, I would check fold the river. But with his high bet versus miss c-bet stat, I just check my hand. Of course, we call his flop bet and he bets small on the turn and we call again. He can bet a hand like jack 10 or queen jack for free showdown. Queen 10 gets there and he bets small, but he don't bet worse hands now and we have to fold. Against this villain, I would play the hand again and again this way. You can put a lot of hands in your flop checking range. I talked in the beginning about the topic that many players check call too many hands like this, but this is an exceptional situation. Normally we would just bet the flop, bet the turn and check fold the river. The only hands he can have are 10-9 and queen 10 and both hands got there. When he is a huge sputard, we can think about a river check call when 10-9 and queen 10 bust. But the default plan is to bet the flop and the turn and then check fold the river. Let's move on to the next hand. I open raise queen unsuited and I don't like this raise. That's why I marked this hand, because I thought there is a potential fish in the big blind, but there's a fish with position on me and he will flat a lot. That's why I don't like my open and we have the regular on the button. And he's capable of 3-betting and he has a 3-bet stat of 18%. Queen 10 suited is the weakest hand. I would open raise now, but I raised and the board comes very unlovely. In my opinion, this is a board which most players check too much. The problem is that many value hands that we beat check behind on a board like this. A hand like 7-8, 8-9, 9-6, 9-5 suited, Jack-9 suited, and he will bet all his 10x hands, all straights, all 2 pairs, and all hands we have super low equity against. And I don't know if we are ahead of his betting range and we get into a really ugly spot, and that's the reason why we should bet, cause all his pair plus draw hands are calling. On this turn, many 9x and 7x flush draws are possible, and we should bet again. We can't bet super huge, cause our hand is not that strong, but we have a value bet, and we should bet the flop and the turn small. I don't think we have a value bet anymore, and he will check many hands that we beat. Don't hero call on the river. Sure, many draws busts, but so many hands have a pair plus draw now, and he can have a lot of value hands. There are not too many draws on this board. King 8 and Queen 8 suited are possible. Ace 8 get there, or a hand like Queen 5 and diamonds. But he can have many 2 pairs now. Ace 7, Ace 9, Ace 10, Ace 3, and I think we can't bluff catch, and we don't know if he is capable of bluffing. We should check fold this river, and he shows Jack 7, and he usually checks with those hands. Or he can have a hand like King 7 or Queen 7. So we shouldn't check call on the flop or on the turn. Okay, next hand we have Ace 8 suited in the small blind, and we make a standard open raise. We play against a weaker opponent, and that's the reason why I just raise a little bit more than a min raise. Against the regular I would open raise between 45 and 50, cause we're out of position, but I think the fun player don't care if we min raise or raise 45 or 48. I think he's calling with the same range. We should bet the flop for value, so many worse hands call and we have massive equity against all value hands. And that's why we shouldn't check. The turn is a semi-good card, cause some draws got there. 8-9 got there, and now we didn't get a better hand to fold. That's why we should check call on this turn. I would bet many turn cards for value. I think every queen, every king, cause there are so many draws, like 9-10, 4-5, 8-9, or weaker flush draws. Sure, it is a very close value bet, but the hand plays so much easier. But I think a check call on the turn, when the turn is a queen, is not too bad. We get value from floats or hands like King 5, when the turn is not a 5, but I would slightly prefer the bet. He checks back and we bink the river. I marked the hand to talk about our bet sizing on the river, and I think my sizing was very bad. I would bet minimum pot size now when he has a 3, an 8, or a lower flush, or a 7. He's not going to fold those hands. I think my sizing is super bad. I think I lost 70 chips with my bet size. You can bet 250, cause a 6 and a 5 are not calling the river bet. So his calling range is very unelastic, and he has a lot of strong hands. He can have a hand like 6 tray, 7-8, or other 8x hands, and many flushes that he's not going to fold. That's why we should bet very huge in this spot. I missed that opportunity and lost minimum 70 chips. Let's look into spots now in which we have the option to flat call out of position. We should pay attention to the raise first instead. When he's very tight, we should defend tighter, and when he's very loose, we can defend lighter. That should be clear. The second view should go to the post-flop stats. We want to know if we can exploit our opponent in some way. Can we defend lighter? You should look at the flop c-bet stat, that's very important. When this stat is very low, this means 40 to 50%, then you can defend a lot, cause half of the time you will see the turn and you will realize your equity better. And when the stat is very high, so 80 to 100%, we should defend tighter, cause we can realize our equity that good. Then we should look at a few other post-flop stats. Full to donk, when this stat is very high, we can exploit that and bluff donk a lot. Or when a player has a high c-bet stat of 80%, then we shouldn't say, okay, I fold. We should look at his full to check raise stat, cause this is super profitable, cause when he c-bets, even more money is in the pot and we can exploit him with bluff check raises post flop. Then we should look at the c-bet turn stat, so how much is he barreling. When he barrels a lot on the turn and a lot on the flop, we should defend even tighter, cause we get into a lot of tough spots with our second pairs and good third pairs when we call the flop. You should look at the stats in this specific order. There are players with very huge leagues and you should adjust to that very hard. Think on the sentence, the more aggressive the opponent, the less we reach the showdown with marginal hands, and that's the reason why we should defend a bit tighter. And I wrote down the other exceptions. When he folds a lot to check raises, we should bluff raise a lot or bluff donk and so on. We have a lot of options. When you have a large sample size, we should include the c-bet river stat also. There are players with a very high flop and turn c-bet stat, and then they have a very low c-bet river stat, so they are more likely to bet the turn instead of the river. So you shouldn't bluff catch too much against those opponents. But I don't want to go too much into detail right now. At first, it is important that you learn all the important stats. When we're out of position, we have the option to out of position float. We often represent more strength than a check raise. This is suitable for dry boards that we can call with our backdoor draws. But we have a few requirements for the out of position float. We need a normal or a high c-bet stat. This may sound contradictory, but when a player c-bets less, his range is stronger and we want to float less hands against this player type. The c-bet stat should be higher than 65% and the turn c-bet stat should be low, so under 40%. Otherwise, we're not able to realize our float, cause the out of position float means that we check call the flop, the turn goes check check, and we take down the pot on the river. Furthermore, we need good backdoor equity. With our out of position float, we represent a meta end, so the board is very dry, and it is important that there are not too many cards to barrel the turn and the river. As an example, on a 4-4 deuce suited board, there are so many flush draws and overcards possible, and we shouldn't float without equity. A queen 6 deuce board is way better. This board will not change. The only thing is that an overcard can come on the turn, but I think you get the point. Or an ace king deuce board, when the turn is not a jack or a queen, this board will not change, and with a check call you can represent many mate hands. That's often better than a check raise. In the worst case, you get a 3-bet cause you represent too few value combos. The out of position float is not that common. That's the reason why you can represent more hands. When you use a line that is not so common, you usually get a little bit more credit. Or you get more credit cause it looks stronger. We will look into a few example hands when you cannot imagine with which hands we can call which boards. Let's look at an example now. I wrote this example down, and I also have another hand in the replayer. We have the situation, we are in the big blind, and the regular on the button min raised, and we call with Queen Jack offsuit in the big blind. We have some infos about him. He raises 55% on the button, and he c-bets 78% on the flop and 33% on the turn. The flop is ace king deuce, and of course we check. Villain c-bets just a little under half pot, and we decide to call with our hand, cause we have the plan to take down the pot on the river. This board is very good to call a hand like Queen Jack, 10 Jack, or Queen 10 offsuit. Most villains barrel very rarely on the turn as a bluff, and we can have many ace x hands. And we should flat our entire range, so when we have a hand like king deuce suited or ace deuce or pocket deuces, we should also check call those hands. We can also have a hand like ace 9 or ace 8 suited, so our range is not all the time weak. The turn is a blank and villain checks behind. Our opponent can't barrel too many turn cards. A 10 and a jack also hits our range well. We can have a hand like king jack, king 10, ace 10 or ace jack. So there's no card which doesn't help our range. So we can represent any turn card, and that's why it is very hard for him to find a good run out to bluff. So his c-bet turn stat should be very low on this board, and that's why our hand is a very suitable out of position float. Sure, he can check some weak aces to bluff catch the river, but I think we will take down the pot on the river very often. He checks the turn back and the river is a blank, and we bet half pot. And I think we should play a hand like jack 10, queen jack, or a queen 10 the same way. When villain bets less than 50% or 55% and second barrels more than 50%, we should just check fold queen jack on the flop, cause he's capable of bluffing the turn to get us off a king. Now you can think, oh, then our range is total unbalanced when we make all the out of position floats. We have more queen high hands in our range and also weak king x hands, and we are prone to be barreled. But I'm not the biggest fan of balanced ranges. When you can exploit your opponents with this line, you should do it. There's no player that writes down the hand you show at showdown and barrel you off your hand in the future. As I told you, when you bluffed and you got called by an ace, mark that he saw you bluffing with this hand in this spot. And with ace 3, ace 4, it is very hard for villain, cause he only has a bluff catcher. Cause nothing busts and we nearly never have air on this spot, cause most players don't play the out of position float and don't know what this is. And that's why many regulars don't expect to get bluffed on the river. I prepared another hand. This hand is three-handed on the flop. He's not the loosest player, but we want to play king queen offsuit in the small blind. I decided to flat call with this hand. You can also 3-bet this hand, and in hindsight I think this is a little bit better. We can play a small 3-bet to 90 or 100. I don't like the reshove, especially against this tight opponent. So we flat call and the big blind overcalls. The player on the cutoff looks like a regular, but when I played this hand I had very few stats on him. On the first 140 hands he c-bets 100% and never c-bet the turn. The advantage of our call is that we only represent strong hands. We represent a few flush draws and ace x hands, and a hand like ace jack, ace 10 or ace 9 suited. And with the blocker we can bluff a hard run out also. The turn is a very good card and he checks. We have the option to check or to bet, and we should definitely bet. We'll bet this whole range on a board like this. he can have a hand like pocket deuces, pocket fives, jacks, tens, or spiked an 8, and we get him off the split also. When he thinks about our check call range, he will realize that his pocket pairs are often beat cause we either have the flush or an ace. That is enough to bet a little bit more than half pot, but unfortunately he made trips on the river. When the river is a blank, then it is a very good spot to overbet, bluff, cause we get many ace-x hands to fold. And when he checks back the turn, he has so few flushes. We block the nut flush and get so many hands to fold when he don't have two pair with an ace. So when the river is a jack and clubs, then we can bet 300 or 320, and I expect him to fold a lot, because our play looks very strong. But we get a little bit unlucky in this hand. I don't think we should overbet on the ace, cause the second ace makes it more unlikely that he has an ace. That's why we don't need to bet so huge. Even if we bet bigger, an ace is not folding, we would only give ourselves a worse price on the bluff, and our perceived range is really strong, so we don't need to bluff bet this big. So even three-handed you can play the out of position float. When we talk about cold calling out of position, we should defend very loose cause the odds are very good. I will show you this on an example later on. Which player is sitting in the big blind is a crucial factor. When he's an aggressive squeezer or 3-better, we should cold call tighter and 3-bet or reshove ourselves with hands like King Queen, Jack 10 suited or Queen 10 suited. But when a passive player or a passive fish is in the big blind, we should rather call these hands. But against nearly any button range, it is profitable to re-steal those hands. An exception is when the button is a maniac, then those hands become very marginal, cause they call with hands like Ace Deuce suited, or Pocket 3s, King 10 suited, or King 8 suited, and then Jack 10 suited and Queen 10 suited become not profitable anymore. So when you are in the small blind, look at the different player types on the button and don't reshove the same range all the time. Let's move on with another interesting topic, one of my favorite topics, the donk bet. For many players this is not a common strategy. I know many players that don't know why they should donk, when they should donk, but there are several spots in which donking has a higher EV than the check raise or the check call. That's in the first spot when we have a value hand and our opponent is very passive or has a low c-bet stat in general, then we should donk our value hands, no matter if we are on the flop or on the turn or on the river. When the player has a high flop c-bet stat and a low turn and river c-bet stat and has in general passive tendencies, we should donk our value hands on the turn to gain initiative. Furthermore, you should donk the turn on cards that are not barreled that often, as in the out of position float example. When we have a value hand and we want to get our stack in over 3 streets and we don't expect the light second barrel, then it is useful to donk ourselves. And this is especially important on turn cards, which make many pairs plus draws possible, so many checkback hands. When you remember the Queen unsuited hand we talked about earlier on the 10-9-7 board, that's a board on which many hands check back and we lose value. Hands like 7-8 or 10-6 or Jack 7 suited, or pairs plus flush draw, or just an open ender that has showdown value with king high or ace high. And when we would have called out position, it is often useful to donk this board, cause we are not that far ahead of his betting range, cause he's betting his nut hands all the time and he checks his second and third pairs. This is very popular by fun players, so when you have a board on which many pairs plus draws are possible, then you should donk more. As another exploit, you can put the full to donk stat in your HUD, then you can defend more hands passive the higher the fold to donk bet stat is, cause we can bluff donk a lot. When the fold to donk bet stat is over 50%, or let's say over 33.33%, just as an example. So when he has a fold to donk bet stat over 34% and we donk half pot, we have a break even donk. To show you this on a very easy mathematical example, cause we only bet half pot and we win the pot every third time, and he's folding every third time. Of course, we have to put some ICM considerations into account. So when we are in the beginning of an sit and go, we need an extra charge of 3.7%, and we need this on the full equity too. So when his full to donk is 34%, the stat has to be 37.7% that we have a break even donk. Of course, it depends on the board and our own hand or our equity, but this was just an example. There are players with more than 50 or 60% full to donk, and you can exploit these players very hard. And against those opponents, you shouldn't donk your value hands. This doesn't make a lot of sense. But look for these spots. Let's look into some example hands in which we have the possibility to donk. We are on the bubble and the regular on the button min raises, or nearly min raises. And of course we defend queen ten offsuit, but we have to defend a lot tighter in this spot. But queen ten offsuit is the bottom range that I would defend here. We have a higher ICM extra charge against him, and we have to pay attention that we don't call too loose, cause when we want to call his flop c-bet, we need more percent also, and I would defend queen 9 suited and queen 8 suited as the bottom end. We flop the nuts, and on 2000 hands he folds 0% to donk bets, and his c-bet stat is on the lower side, 43%. Even when he had a high c-bet stat, I would donk this board, cause he has so many hands that he is backchecking with. 10-8, 10-9, Jack-10, Queen-Jack, even hands like King-Jack, or hands like 8x with a diamond, or a hand like King-10, and all those hands call a bet. Especially his stats are the prime example when we should donk, but I think my sizing was a disaster. We should bet minimum half pot on this board texture. I don't know why I sized so small. Normally this is not a bad regular, but it looks like that he has many post-flop leaks on the bubble. I just realized now how huge his leaks are. I just chose this board and my hand cause it's a good donking hand. But you can exploit his stats very good. We can defend a little bit lighter pre-flop against him, cause he c-bets very few hands and we should donk many value hands. Maybe I thought I would donk very light for value, and I have weak hands that I'm donking with, and I want to have a balanced range. I don't really know, but I think I should donk bigger cause I expect a lot of calls. We have the plan on the turn and we donk again. The river is a blank and of course we shove. I think when we check here we just get usually one street, and with our donk we got two streets. I did not expect him to fold that river, cause to call with just a draw is tough for him. He don't get the correct odds to call and everything busts on the river. But maybe he didn't think that I was capable of bluffing in this spot, and I wouldn't bluff that much in the spot cause so many draws busts. But this depends on the regular. We don't know what they think. Sometimes you just have to try it and look at their results. When I see a sick call or I see that he is capable of folding, then just note it and make it better the next time. Now let's talk about this heads up hand. We are relatively deep with 18, 19 big blinds, and the player on the button is a regular. He raises in 68% of the time in the small blind, and we have a clear defend. The flop is pretty good. On his first 200 hands, he has a fold to donk bet stat of 0%. Your first view should go to the board, and after that you should look how much is he folding to donk bets. Cause when you have a bluff hand, you should look at his fold to donk bet stat pre-flop, cause you want to play more hands against players with huge post-flop leaks. I would defend a little bit tighter against him, cause I can't bluff donk against him, and he c-bets a lot, so we can't exploit him with bluffs. And that's the reason why we go light for value with donks. On a board like this, many ace highs, maybe even king highs, will check. A hand like king 4, king 6 or king x with backdoors, or a hand like pocket 4s, and his min-raising range don't hit the board very hard. He has many overcards or ace high, king high hands, so his checkback range is higher on this board than on different boards. With his low full to donk bet stat, I like the donk. He calls and the turn is obviously very nice. I think we can check, cause most hands just have a gut shot against our hand. So a hand like ace6 or ace deuce, ace3, and that's why protection is not that important now. I think he will broke many flush draws on the flop, cause he often has a gut shot with it. So gut shot plus flush draw or open ender with a flush draw, or just strong overcards with the flush draw. And that's why I don't think that he has many flush draws, cause he can think with his jack high, queen high and king high draws that he can get it in against weaker draws. He has full equity against our bet and gets sometimes a deuce or a 3 to fold, and that's why I think he's fast playing his flush draws on the flop. That's why we don't need that much protection, and when we donk with a 4 we have not that much fold equity on the turn and we just give up. He checks back, and I think he will do this often with ace high. Now we have to think, how big do we want to value bet? Sometimes he has a king in his range, so a hand like king 4, king 6, king 7, and very rarely he can have a flush draw with the king, but I want to discount that. But in 2% of the time he can have it. And then he has a lot of ace high hands. I think he can hero call with ace high, and that's why I decided to bet big. He's never going to fold a king, and when he wants to hero call, he will do it. But unfortunately he folds. Let's move on to the next hand. Under the gun min raises, and we see that we have no stats on him. So we can look if we can exploit him with a donk bet or with a check raise. This is a standard defend, and we flop very good. He c-bets relatively big, and I think in this spot I like both options, the check raise and the check call. I decided to check call. On a board like this, many overcards on the turn will be barreled, and that's why I think check call is a little bit better than the check raise. I have the opinion that the players in 6max Hyper Turbo Sit and Goes like to bluff, and sometimes they barrel very aggressive, but that's just my opinion. A check raise is also fine. The turn card is a brick, and it's a very bad barrel card for him. I think with hands like 8-7, 6-7, 4-5, 9-7, so pairs with an open ender, or 6x with a flush draw, or hands like a7, king 7 can check back now, and I don't want that. That's why I donk the turn. I think I would donk every low card, every deuce, 3, 5, 6, and every 7. Maybe every 10 and jack also, and on the queen, king, and ace I let him barrel. Cause with a 10 he makes many pairs plus straight draws. He calls and we ship the river. You can't do anything against it. But I think this is the max EV line when you check call the flop. Let's move on to the next hand. The button min raises and he's a weaker player. Of course we flat call. We don't know how much he's folding against the donk, so that's a standard check call. We are ahead against some hands and we have good equity. We turn the 6 and against a fun player we should always bet. And we should bet big. We only get value of flush draws, sets and 7x. These hands often check behind and we don't want that. That's why we should donk in this spot. He's only calling with the hands I mentioned, and that's why we should bet very huge, and I made a huge mistake. We should bet over 120 cause he's not folding his set and his flush draw. Sometimes he has a hand like 6-7, 5-7, 3-7 suited, a7 or king 7, and he's going to call with these hands. But everything busts on the river, and he sometimes has a hand like ace3, ace4, ace6, and I wanted to keep these hands. That's why I only bet 1/3 pot. You can also shove, but I think you get lighter calls when you don't put them all in. And he calls with a 6. I don't know if he would have called when we shipped the river. And let's move on to the next hand. We have a regular on the cutoff, and we see he has a low full to donk bet stat of 33%, so we can't exploit him with bluff donks. We can flat call a lot against him cause he c-bets very little, so his stat is not super low with 57 but on the lower side, and his second barrel stat is also on the lower side. We flat and flop a very good hand. I think a hand like Queen Jack or King Jack is strong enough to donk. With Jack 10 I think check is okay too. We don't want to isolate ourselves against his strong value range, but when his full to donk bet stat is even smaller, then I think donking Jack 10 is fine. Of course we call his c-bet. I think the turn is a nice card to donk bet, and he has a low turn c-bet stat. On this turn he has many pairs with a flush draw or draw with a mate hand, or a hand like ace deuce, ace 3 in hearts, or in clubs that check back now cause they have showdown value. All those hands call a bet. I only see monster draws like queen 10 and king 10 in his betting range, so overcard, gut shot and the flush draw, and I don't think that we can call against his turn c-bet range cause we're crushed against his overpairs, two pairs and sets, and that's why I decided to donk. And I like my play there, and I think this is max EV. He calls and the river is the ace in clubs, and we have to check fold I think. The problem is that he bets so small. In hindsight I think a shove would be nice, of course with the intention of turning our hand into a bluff. It looks a little bit spewy with our second pair cause sometimes we are ahead against a hand like queen 10 or king 10 and all the hard draws. A call is also okay, I think, but I think the shove is also a good idea. We can represent so many flushes. We have every jack in clubs and every four in clubs, like king 4, 4-6 suited, queen 4 suited, 10-4 suited, and we could defend all those hands against this player, or even a hand like 4-3 in clubs, and that's why I like the shove. We can play ace 4 or ace 9 this way. Okay, the turn donk with ace 4 is maybe a bit optimistic, but we definitely can have ace 9. Or we can have ace 5 in hearts. But he called and he had ace deuce. But in this spot the turn play is crucial. On the river both options are legit. This will not make the difference if you are a huge winning player or not. But on the turn with our donk we win more money than when you're always in the check call mode. Let's move on to the next hand. We have jack 8 offsuit and I would defend passive till jack 7 offsuit. We flop super nice and I want to donk with my hand, but he has an extremely high full to donk bet stat, and this stat was just a little bit too high for me, and he c-bets with 62% relatively normal. So normally I like the donk, but with his high full to donk bet stat, I think he can fold a 9. Maybe he's capable of folding even a 10. And maybe a donk looks a little bit too strong on a board like this, so we should exploit him with bluff donks. We could defend till jack 6, jack 5 offsuit, cause his full to donk bet league is so huge. And I checked my hand. The turn is an interesting hand. I would donk any turn except the ace, cause when he checks this board back, we're not getting any value of his heir when we donk the turn. This should be clear. And I don't think that a 9 or a 10 are calling a bet on this board texture, especially with a high full to donk bet stat. I don't see value there. Maybe jack 10 and king 10, but we give him the opportunity to bet his heir, and all his ace x hands are going to value bet. And I think we should just check raise. When he has a 2 pair, he's not going to fold, and there are some action killer cards possible. A jack or a king should we block some hands, but that's some outs. Even a queen and a 10 are not that pretty. We don't get that much value, and maybe he gets sucked by his full house. I think check raise or check call and then donk river is okay. Everything is possible. The river is a little bit ugly. We should bet really small. I think he will check back all 2 pairs, and this way we get some value of his 2 pairs. I decided to bet 1/3 pot, and I think this is the best line. Let's move on to the next hand. He completes, and of course we check with this hand. We flop okay, but I think this hand is a bit too weak to donk. You can think about it with a hand like king 8, but jack 8 is too weak. The turn is a card which is not barreled that often, and he's not the most aggressive player, and that's why I decided to donk. Cause I think many worse 8x hands have now a flush draw and call. He can have a 7 with a flush draw, and sure, he can have some queen x and flushes, but overall he will check more hands than he will bet. But we are ahead against the check behind hands, and we are behind against his betting range, and that's the problem in this spot. When we bet ourselves, then worse hands call our bet. Sure, he can barrel his jack high or king high hard draws, but these hands have equity against our hand, and his value range just crushes our hand. He calls, and we river 2 pair. I think we should shove. We have often the best hand, and he can have a hand like 7-8, king queen, ace queen, aces, kings, or jack 3 suited, and sometimes you will get really sick calls. and he don't have so many flushes cause he completed preflop with 10 big blinds. He will shove all his suited connectors preflop, and he can have a hand like King 10 or King Jack and hearts. That's possible, but that's not too many combos. So we shove and he folds, cause check call is not a good idea, I think. When we check, no worse hands are betting, and with just a bluff catcher. And with this line we get paid by his worst two pairs, and sometimes all pairs and top pairs. Let's move on to situations when we should cold call in position. We will look at first into spots when we are defending against a small blind open raise, and we should defend extremely light against min raises or 2.5x open raises, cause we get so good odds. I have the opinion that most players defend too tight, and I prepared an example. We have 5-9 offsuit in the big blind and the small blind min raises, and now we look if we have a profitable defend with 9-5 offsuit. I put my hand against his range into the simulator. He has 62% raise first in the small blind, and we want to know on which flops we have which equity. We get odds of 22%. We're in the beginning of a sit and go, and in the beginning we have an ICM extra charge of 3.7% when the payout structure is 65-35. Because we're a bit short, I calculate the extra charge with 4%, so we need 26% odds. We need to win the pot every fourth time to break even. On the x-axis we have the number of deal flops, and on the y-axis we have our equity. Now we look at 26% cause that are our odds. We want to see in which cases we have which equity, and we can see that we have a little bit more than 50% equity. We don't need to calculate the extra charge cause we already included it. So in 26% of the time we have over 50% on the flop. So with 22% it's not accurate. I think then we could defend with one card, cause we have to play a flop and have to call additional bets, and this program only calculates till the flop, and we see we have a break-even call when we include the bubble factor, but we have the position advantage. So even when the call is slightly minus EV, we can defend profitably, cause we can realize our equity better than our opponent out of position. So we can call with very marginal hands, cause we give us the edge and we are in position. When we find the one or another post-flop leak, then we can call even lighter. Against him I would call 9-4 offsuit 2, cause we're in position and the odds are too good. He is not the most aggressive opponent. He c-bets 61% on the flop, but he barrels a lot. We look at the hand soon, but at first I would like to finish the last points. So to what should we pay attention in general when we cold call? It is very important that you don't float too light against aggressive opponents. We just burn too much money. Don't call your gut shots or other marginal holdings like king deuce suited on a 10-5 deuce board or 7-8 on a 10-6 deuce board. We can take down the pot by ourselves with a bet. That's the meaning of a float, that when you don't improve, you still have the option to take down the pot. When our opponent barrels too much, we can't do anything, cause we don't get the right odds to call the bet. Especially with the shallow stacks, pay attention to this. So before you decide what to do on the flop, look at his turn c-bet stat. Against spewed hearts, you should fast play your strong hands and raise them on the flop. On boards which don't crush villain's range or your range, like a 6-6-10 board, just raise, and sometimes you see the sickest reshoves. When you have some reads that villain is very spewy or is a maniac or regular that never believes, then just raise straightforward for value. And many people ask me this all the time. Should I call down or check raise on a board like this? When I check raise, my calling range is really weak. Balancing is not that important in this spot. Make it opponent dependent. When he c-bets a lot on the flop and not so much on the turn, just raise the flop, because we want to get all the money in with our value range, because we're ahead of his value range. And you want to get some money off his bluffs, but when he c-bets 80% on the flop and 30% on the turn, then you can't expect too many turn c-bets. That's why you can raise your hands on the flop. Then you have the possibility that he don't believes and shove over the top, and with this way there's no action killer cards on the turn, cause on the turn we only get bets of his value hands. When my opponent has 60, 50, 40 c-bet stats, so 60% flop c-bet, 50% turn c-bet, and 40% river c-bet, then I would call more value hands. But if someone has a large gap between flop and turn, then just raise the flop. And you don't have to be afraid that you are unbalanced, cause long term it will compensate against all players. Against some players you raise and against some players you call, so the other players can't exploit this. Don't think too much about balancing, just try to play the best you can against your opponent. I wrote this point down. Overfolding can also be a good exploit. Most players think that you can only exploit your opponent with very loose ranges, with very loose free bets and loose deals, but you can also exploit your opponents with a very tight approach, cause they barrel, and we always have a value hand on the river. But when we float against barrel happy opponents, then we just burn our money. When we talk about cold calling on the button, the cutoff, and in middle position, the ranges are not that variable, cause we have players behind which can 3-bet or 4-bet. So we have two important points. When a fish is behind you, then you should widen your calling range a little bit. You want to play with the fun player that your in-game table selection gets better and you don't play your standard ranges. And when an aggressive re-stealer or 3-better is behind you, then you should cold call a bit tighter. So you should play your standard cold calling range, and when you have a close hand, then you decide it on the basis of these 2 points. When in the blinds are 2 huge fun players, then you can call 10-9 offsuit on the button or Jack-9 offsuit against the cutoff raise. So you can call way looser than normal, and when only aggros are behind you, then flat call very rarely. And the smaller the stack size get, the tighter we have to cold call. So in the blind stage 15-30 and the stack sizes are between 15 and 20 big blinds, then we should flat call very rarely. Mostly hands like King Queen suited, King Jack suited, or King 10 suited. Given the stack size, we haven't so much room to move, and we can think about bluffs real small and those things. We can flat call in the big blind with some hands, but we can't make a ton of money there. Let's look at some example hands now when we have cold called. The small blind raises and we have 10-5 offsuit. We can see that he open raises very loose with 71%, and I think this hand is the bottom end and we should call. We saw that we have a close defend with 9-5 against the 61% range, so 10-5 offsuit is definitely a defend. Of course, we call his c-bet and he bets very, very small, so I think his hand is weak, like pocket queens, jacks, 9s, 8s, a 3, ace queen, ace jack, or sometimes total air like 6-7 offsuit, and he wants to give himself a very good price against our 8 high, 9 high or jack high hands, but I think his size in general is weak. The turn is a blank and he checks. I have the note on him that he is a station. That's why I don't think that he's check folding his mate hands, cause so many draws are possible. Cause he is a calling station, we should widen our value range. Against a normal rack, I would bet any boat, any good 10 like ace 10, queen 10, jack 10, 10 9. But when I know he is a calling station, then I bet every 10, cause he's calling with pocket 8s, pocket 9s, and many ace high hands. And he is not only a station, he is also very call happy on the river when everything busts. That's why we have the easy value bet against this player on the turn. Now the river is interesting. He checks again, and I don't think that he has a king. I think that he often has a hand like pocket 9s, pocket 7s, pocket 6s or pocket 8s. Sometimes a 3, ace queen and ace jack are possible, and I think we have a close value bet against this call happy player. I mean, so many hands busts, queen 9, queen jack, all the flush draws, and he will not expect that we value bet a 10. But I bet my 10 relatively big and he calls with ace 9. So pay attention that you bet bigger against those calling stations and that you value bet wider. I want to show you this hand cause we play against a rack with many leaks. Look at his raise first in stats. They are catastrophic. His stats are way too loose in early position and in middle position, and I want to show you that it is very hard to play good post flop with these loose ranges. He c-bets 83%, folds 50% to check raises, and the 15 is his turn c-bet stat. And I talked about this in my pre-flop course about the non-showdown winnings. He c-bet the flop and has to check fold the turn all the time, and I think he's burning a lot of money, and we want to call with our hand cause he is not barreling, so we see the showdown very cheap. We have a good hand and we wide our calling range from queen 10 to queen 9 suited, and I think we can flat call queen 8 suited against this opponent as well. And against other racks I would sometimes only call queen jack suited. So you can play flexible ranges when you flat call, and you just can't play his loose ranges profitably. So he c-bets too much, but when he c-bets less, he check folds too much. There is no optimal stat when you are too loose in middle position. The big blind overcalls and we are three-handed. Of course we call the flop. He checks the turn and we bet for value. He can call so many worse hands. Ace X, spades, sixes, sevens, nines, tens, jacks. We can bet very huge. I think 90 to 100 is a better size than 80. You can see that I bet too small myself. That's why I mark those hands and try to fix it. The river is a bit unlucky and he has many spades in his range. And yeah, he has ace king with a king and spade. Let's move on to the next hand. The small blind open raises and we have a clear call. Now let's look at his stats 85, 52, 83. Against this player I don't want a floating range, and that's why I decided only to call against his c-bet. If he had stats of 20 or 15% on the turn, then I would raise. But in this case, I want to let him barrel, and I call my entire range on the flop. Maybe I raise my small flushes, cause they are very vulnerable. But in this case, even when a spade hits, we have the third nut flush, and with a jack or a queen, we have the second nut flush. We call down and we get 3 streets value. Maybe he was betting an ace 4 than value. I don't want to say that he's always bluffing. His betting frequencies are too high and you shouldn't raise the flop. Just look at his stats. We have 1100 hands, and that's a solid sample size. Let's move on with the next hand. We have a7 suited on the button. Against some players I would 3-bet this hand or fold, but he plays 34% from the cutoff. This stat can be good. I told you in the preflop course that you can open till 35% on the cutoff. We flat call and no aggressive players are behind. We flop pretty nice and he c-bets. We call his c-bet. His stats look pretty normal. I like his open raise ranges 15, 21, 34, 54 button. Maybe a little bit too tight in the small blind, but when you think back on the charts I gave you, his stats are very similar to my charts or my framework. Maybe he could barrel a bit more. His turn c-bet stat is a little bit low, but I think this stat is okay. And we should just call his bet. Now we have overcard, a flush draw, and a gut shot, so we call again. I don't like the raise. I don't think we have much full equity, cause his turn c-bet stat is on the lower side. When we play against the player of the hand earlier, which second barreled a lot, then I would definitely ship, cause he's the player type that bets hands like king 6, queen 6 suited, 7 6 suited, or a 5. So they bet way too light for value and bluff a lot too, and they bet hands like pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket 7s, and 8s, and all those hands fold against our shove. Sometimes worse draws call our shove, so a hand like king 10 in heart or 9 8 in hearts, and he level himself that he gets the right odds to call. But in this spot we should call and not raise. He checks the river. The question is if we should shove or not. We have many jack x hands, but I like the check behind too. Sometimes we are ahead. My shove is a bit strange. When I say his second barrel range is really strong, so he gets to the river with a stronger range. And I'm not calling his turn c-bet with naked flush draws like 10-9 in heart, cause I'm not getting the right odds on the turn, cause when a heart hits the river, my range is a bit too obvious. And that's the reason why I can't extract that much value against the regular. So don't always call your flush draws. I have hands like king queen in hearts, king 10 in hearts, maybe king 9 in hearts, and when I shove all those hands I can have 6s, ace jack, king jack, queen jack offsuit, jack 10 suited, jack 9 suited, and I want to have some bluff combinations. And we get a lot better ace high hands to fold, and when he bet light for value on the turn, I might get these hands also to fold, but that's really close, and we have to look at the combinations. But the important point in this scenario is the preflop defend. Look at all the options you have on the flop with the draw or on the turn, and that you play your draw according to his stats. And when this player would be aggressive on the turn, then I would ship my draw on the turn. And as you can see, it's very simple to make a decision based on stats. Here I misplayed a hand and I want to show you this hand. This hand is very interesting and you can defend this hand pre-flop. In this hand we need 28% equity, and when we think back on the calculation, we had a call with 9-5 offsuit, and 8-6 should also have good equity. and his flop c-bet stat is not that high, so we see in the turn often. I think his 62% c-bet is very solid. That's why 8-6 is the bottom end of my defending range, and I give myself a good post-flop edge against many opponents, cause many sit and go players are not that good post-flop. But I think I misplayed the hand on the flop and on the turn. Let's look at his stats. He looks like an aggressive, barrel happy player. He will not check too many hands, especially when he c-bets this board texture, and I think we should fold a 9, cause I don't expect him to value bet worse hands. This feels a little bit like he's exploiting us, but you can't do much about it. He's a very good post-flop player, and he knows when he can barrel. And he's not too loose, especially with his 62% flop c-bet. So his range is overall stronger, and he can fire more turns and rivers. But he c-bets only 62% on the flop. Most regulars have between 65 and 80% on the flop, and that's why you can defend this hand pre-flop, cause he will check fold often enough with his 62% flop c-bet. I call the flop, and I think that's very bad. On the turn we get a flush draw to it, and he bets half pot. Then you think that you get the right odds, but in reality you're drawing that, and very often you call the river bricks and then you have to fold. That's just burning money, and I played this hand very bad. When the mistake happened and you mark the hand, it is important that you see your mistake, and you should try to fix that leak, and everyone makes mistakes. Let's move on to the next hand. We have 6-4 suited on the button, and we have a player with huge post-flop leaks. These are even bigger than the player earlier had. He c-bets a lot with 89%. In 63% of the time he folds to a raise, and he's only second barreling 17%. I think this is really strange, cause his open raise ranges look solid. It looks like he has huge post-flop leaks, and for his stats he's folding too much to 3-bets. When you open raise 14% in UTG, you shouldn't fold 67% to 3-bets. That's just too much. And we can flat call a lot against this opponent. The small blind is a bit on the aggressive side, but he has so many leaks we can exploit, and we should flat call with this hand. Unfortunately we are four-handed, but we have position, and against him we have all the options. We can raise, we can float, we could play 3 deuce offsuit this way. We have so much immediate profit against him on the flop. We can raise any 2 against him or float with any 2. That's very bad on his part, and we have a hand that can flop good equity. You can see it on his sizing. I don't know with which hands he is betting this size. Looks like ace 10 with the ace in clubs or pocket 5s or ace 4 or ace king. I would size my value hands very normal and then give up. I don't know with what hands he is betting against 3 players with this size. Of course we check the turn, and we check, and he's played ace king this way. That's a bit strange, and with this hand we can see that he has huge post-flop leaks. Let's move on to the next hand. The small blind raises, and of course we flat very wide. Jack 9 is a no-brainer. In this spot we have an interesting player. Now we should ask ourselves if we want to raise with this hand or if we want to call. Let's look at his stats. We see that he is capable of barreling, but he's only folding 14% against a raise, and that's in 4,000 hands. That's just a huge leak. He will lose so much money with that, and you should raise straightforward for value. This may look a bit overplayed, but he's not folding ace high, so ace king, ace queen, king 9, queen 9, 8 9, no 10, no 4x, no pocket 8s, pocket 9s, and that's the player type that can click back with queen 8 or queen 9 or something and get it in, and we can just call their shove. Against an average reg, I would maybe raise king jack for value, and against him I would add queen jack, jack 9 and jack 8 as an exploit. And here he is now. I think that it makes no sense to ship now. I mean, it makes sense and it is profitable, and we take down the pot, but I think a call is more profitable because we want to keep his air range. He can hit a 8 with a hand like 7-8 or a 6 with a hand like 6-7. Against his draws, we are all in on the turn and we broke all cards. Any 8, 9, queen or an ace, it doesn't matter, cause we decided on the flop that we broke with our hand, and he can bluff an overcard as well. He jams and we call, and he played king 10 this way, and you can see it on his stats also, and there are many players like him. It is important that you can spot his leaks very fast, because many players only have c-bet, full to c-bet, win to showdown, but there are so many more stats, and you can exploit your opponents very hard with this. Let's move on with the 9-5 hand, in which we looked at the calculator. We defended with 9-5 and we hit bottom 2 pair. Against him we shouldn't float. He has aggressive barrel stats on the turn and especially on the river. He's not folding a strong 9 or a queen, and he's only folding in 28% of the time to a check raise. He looks a bit spewy on the flop, and that's why we should raise the flop, cause our hand is really vulnerable. We should call a hand like queen 9 and let him barrel, but we should raise 9-5 for value, even with his high barrel stats, but his full to raise stat is very low, and that's why we should fast play our hand. And he shows 8-9 offsuit. Maybe I bluffed him in the past and he levels himself, but that's really sick, cause he's dead against any queen or any 2 pair. Even against the draws, I've minimum a overcard and a gut shot. Against jack 8 he is not that far ahead. As I told you, many players have huge post-flop leaks. The hands you saw are from the $200 to $500 limit, so on the lower stakes are even more people with huge post-flop leaks. Don't make everything super complicated. Just use the available stats and hands and exploit your opponents. It's not that complicated. You saw it in the example hands. You make the decision depending on the available stats, and you practice this to get faster, and you will see more situations in the future, and that's what it's all about. We have to look at some stats together. The preflop defense are in the dependence of the postflop stats. That's a problem which many players have on the lower stakes, because many players have a problem with their ego and they don't know that they can exploit their opponents by folding, or they do it very rarely. When you have mental problems, you should remember this. You should mark as much post-flop situations as possible. Use all the material you can use, so stats, buy hands, and watch some cash game videos. That's a good way to get better post-flop. Write things down and try to implement some concepts in your game. There are also some very good heads-up cap videos. In these videos, we have the same stack size than in the 6max Hyper Turbo Sit and Goes. It is important that you have a clearly arranged HUD and you have all the important stats that you can exploit and make the most money of it, and not an overloaded HUD with useless stats. When you have notes or reads on a specific opponent, how he plays his hands, then this is more important than his stats. So when you have a stat that he folds a lot to check raises, like 60%, but you saw that he shoves his second pair on the flop, then just go light for value, even when his stats tell a different story. Cause in his stats is a lot of variance. Of course, in the reads and notes, this can also happen. So maybe he was tilting, but it is more likely that he's able to play aggressive. That's it for the post-flop part. I think you got a lot of new content. I think many players do the wrong thing now. They go to the tables and try to implement everything in their game. And that's wrong. I already told you this in the pre-flop series. I don't know how fit you are post-flop. The videos are structured that you have in the beginning some easier topics, and it makes sense to begin with these. Not that you start right away with the donking spots, but you don't know how to defend out of position, and that's the important point. This should be a guide that you can work through from the beginning to the end. Depending on how fast you can learn, pick a topic like as the pre-flop raiser in position and then try to internalize this topic. Try to make very few mistakes, and when you notice that you automatically look at the right stats and you play your ranges according to your opponents, then you move on with the next topic. And that's very important. When you go directly to the tables and try to use all the new material, you can also watch a live video from another training site. It is important that you memorize the content long term, and you need to be effective with that. That's our main goal. I think there's a lot of content when you watched all three parts, but this is also wrong. You should have internalized the first video when you're watching this video, and then this part should be easier as well. So don't skip anything. And that's it from my part. I wish you best of luck at the tables, and we see us next time. And this was Ben CB for Raise Your Edge.